You're watching PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Mannarino.
Hey everybody, welcome to PIX on Politics Daily. It is January 13th. I'm Dan Mannarino, and hopefully everybody's having a great day. Obviously, there are a lot of conversations happening around ICE, what played out in Minneapolis, right? And then I don't know if you've been following the news locally here in New York City, but just last night, a staff member that works for the city council was going to a routine hearing on Long Island and was detained by ICE and then brought here to Lower Manhattan and is still in custody. There are a lot of questions about where exactly is he, right? We spoke to Councilmember Alexa Aviles on the PIX 7 Morning News this morning, who was saying that this is an individual who works for the city council, has been there for a year, has legal status until October, and was going for his routine hearing to further that legal status. She doesn't understand where exactly the wires got crossed. Now, the federal government is saying that the person was here illegally. So there's a lot to be said about what exactly that situation is and how it's unfolding. The council is going to be downtown in Lower Manhattan today having a protest. But it kind of brought back this whole idea of what happens when somebody is in ICE custody. And this morning, the council was saying that they know he was brought to Lower Manhattan. He got one phone call. He was able to call somebody from the council and talk to them. But they really weren't sure where he was brought to begin with until he got to Lower Manhattan, where he goes next, what happens next, right? So there are a lot of questions, and that has been the case for so many for so long, including people here who were detained at federal courthouse going to their legal status, right? Going to their court proceedings. That's why Dan Goldman and Brad Lander, all those folks were trying to find what was going on at the federal courthouse. But let me bring in Emily Rahhal. She's our digital reporter right now, who has been really hard at work at this very topic, Emily. And you had this great article about what happens once you are detained by ICE. So great to have you here.
Happy to be here.
And so that is the question so many have, right? What happens beyond the detainment? And, back when it was happening at the federal courthouse where Brad Lander was literally putting himself in the way so people couldn't be detained, I would ask Brad, where are they going? I mean, once they get on that elevator and you see them kind of disappear, where are they going? He's like, we don't know.
Absolutely.
So what happens?
So generally, the issue here is with kind of where and at what point people are tracked and logged by DHS.
Yeah.
So initially, the mayor's office says that it'll take about a day for someone to be processed into an ICE detention center. That's, assuming this person, ICE has decided they're going to detain this person.
Yeah.
So they'll be processed for about a day, kept in maybe a holding room for that period of time. And then ICE kind of unilaterally will decide where they're going to detain this person. ICE says those decisions are made based on bed space, things like that. Necessarily, people won't be detained in New York City because there's not a lot of bed space in New York City. But then they're logged into a tracking system. Lawyers and advocates say that tracking system is not updated regularly. So that's where you get this situation where people have no idea where their loved one has went because they're checking this tracking system and they have no contact past that processing place where it hasn't been decided necessarily where they're going yet. And so there's this kind of disconnect for a couple of days where people are saying, my family member is lost to me. This staff member is completely lost to us.
Yeah.
And it can take, advocates and lawyers say it can take days. And then there are also exceptions to that tracking system. So juveniles aren't kept in that tracking system. And then holding rooms, like the 10th floor holding room at 26 Federal Plaza, that wouldn't be included on the tracking system as well. So that's kind of how these people are ending up lost to their loved ones.
The question that I was getting a lot from folks was somebody's detained by ICE.
Right.
They are scheduled to go to court. But when does a deportation say happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process is long. I think that's what people are aware of, but they don't, like you're saying, don't know necessarily how that happens. Generally, people are being detained through the end of their court proceedings. So they're going to be detained until they either win or lose their case. If they win the case, they'll be released and sent back home. If they lose, they'll be given a deportation order and sent to another country.
But aren't we hearing, Emily, some folks who are not going through that process necessarily, who are just being deported?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two different types of things that will happen after arrest. In a general kind of normal arrest, you'll be given a notice to appear, and that is the charging document saying, we are accusing you of being in this country without status, and you need to come to court and you need to fight that charge. You need to either tell us why we're wrong or say you're seeking asylum or we're going to deport you. And so that is kind of That's that first court hearing where you're being formally given your charge of
Okay.
being in here without legal status.
Yep.
That'll generally take 2 to 4 weeks, the mayor's office says, to get to that first hearing. So if you're detained, you're almost necessarily going to be there for 2 to 4 weeks just to get to that first one.
Right.
And generally, that first hearing is more logistical, putting things on the calendar. They're what's called a master calendar hearing. It's not necessarily your time to fight your case, but rather that moment to say, these are your charges. Are you aware of them? And how are you pleading to them?
Okay.
And then you're there in detention generally through the end of your case. That ICE will come and take you to court when you need to be in court, and you'll have your hearings and whatnot. The issue that's happening here is that lawyers and advocates and even hundreds of judges now are saying that the federal government is wrongly denying people the ability to get a bond hearing and to get released from detention. Generally, people who aren't in some exceptional categories like convicted criminals should be able to, once they're put in detention, go before an immigration judge and say, I think I shouldn't be in detention. I think I should be back out with my family and play out my court case there. So then however
And that
long their
happens.
case. And that happened. Well, it was happening. It was quite standard before for people like, say, someone who may have come into the country without permission and has been here for 20 years and has a family and has a job and contributes to the economy. They might be detained once they're arrested and then go before an immigration judge and say, I have all these reasons that I think I should be in the community.
Right.
What's happening now is that the vast majority of people who are detained are being put in what's called mandatory detention, which gives them absolutely no option
Right.
for release.
Are
So
you-
they're there for, this is how you're hearing that people are there for, months to years. 10% of people currently in ICE detention have been there for over 6 months. So the average time to be in detention is far lower than that,
Yeah.
but it's a huge percentage of the population of people in detention who are there for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and all of this is getting a whole lot of attention, right? But there's a lot of discussion around the narratives that are being told. For some of these cases you're talking about, somebody who may be here for 20 years,
Yeah.
that might be what the advocates or somebody, like take, for example, the city council member.
Mhm.
It's two very different stories from what
Absolutely.
the ICE and federal government is saying versus what the city council is saying.
Yeah. I
Right.
think part of the issue here is this question of criminality.
Yeah.
This question of whether and to what extent we're considering immigration violations crimes worthy of
Well, yeah.
detention.
I mean, I spoke to the field director, Ken Gianalo, for
Mhm.
ICE, and I know you watched the interview where I said to him, what is the definition of criminality? Because it was always
Right.
the worst of the worst going after the worst of the worst. And he said, well, you've already committed a crime if you're here illegally.
Exactly.
And so they're kind of going off of that baseline,
Right.
which is different from worst of the worst.
Absolutely. And this threshold for mandatory detention is meant to be criminal convictions. It's not meant to be, immigration violations. And of the people in detention right now, 70% have not been convicted of a crime. So that is kind of where this main tension is. And even for these people who are convicted of the crime, a lot of times, DHS is coming out and saying, oh, this person does have a history with law enforcement. Those crimes can be as low level as a single, marijuana charge.
Everybody should read the article that you wrote because it is fascinating to read. But it is very timely here. What's happening in Minneapolis versus what's happening here in New York and really around the country is, what do you do if you are somebody who has, say, a court case for legal
Yeah.
status, and you want to go and do the right thing,
Yeah.
but now we're seeing somebody like a city council member getting arrested?
I think this is the tricky thing, and this is the part that I think advocates and lawyers are having a hard time advising. The advice is still from lawyers and advocates to go to your court cases, to continue to go about it the right way. But detentions and arrests are increasing at court hearings and at regular ICE check-ins. So I definitely think that is kind of the question that exists for everyone, and especially with this issue of mandatory detention, it's increasingly looking like if you get in detention, you're not necessarily going to have a huge chance to get out. And even winning your case is sometimes not even a great enough reason to get out. We're seeing that people are stuck in detention even after they've won their immigration case because the government has decided to appeal the case and retry certain parts of it.
What if you're a U.S. citizen?
If you're a U.S. citizen, you can still be detained in the moment
By ICE.
by ICE. I think this is the question of that Supreme Court judgment about how profiling can be used in this. But essentially, you'll be let go as soon as you can produce proof and documentation of your proper legal status. That's true for visa holders. That's true for anyone who is of proper, immigration status. Once you can prove that, you are theoretically meant to be let go. There was a case, I think, about 10 years ago where a U.S. citizen from New York City spent 3 years in ICE detention fighting his case. So there are definitely exceptional cases. But generally, if you can produce those documents, you should be fine.
I know it's not a conversation that's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. And there are a lot of questions. I mean, and just speaking to Alexa Avila as a council member this morning, she had said, you could see the struggle in her when she's presented with the question of what are you urging people to do who are going to the court case. And she's saying, well, obviously go, but bring a team with you, bring a lawyer, bring an advocate, bring somebody who might be able to fight for you on your and have a plan if you were to come in contact with somebody.
And that's a huge part of it, is that, legal outcomes for people who are represented are way, way better in these immigration cases. It's true of people who are in and not in detention. And so I think that is generally the advice, is just as much as you can try to get in contact with a lawyer, try to have your family get in contact with a lawyer, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. And Governor Hochul is going to expect to put some things in her State of the State, which is happening today on Tuesday. And so you and I are having this conversation earlier. So we'll see what comes out of the State of the State as well. But she is somebody who, even when I spoke to her last week, she had said, look, I want to get the worst of the worst out of here. That was the agreement.
Of course.
And all of this is obviously something very, very different. Emily, great to have you here. Continue to do your awesome reporting, okay?
Awesome.
All right, everybody, and that's going to do it for us on PIX on Politics. Stay tuned, because coming up on Friday's show, I'm speaking for one of her first TV interviews with the new FDNY Fire Commissioner. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, have a great day.